What are the main use cases that Minima is playing in right now, and what are the main use cases that you see in the next few years or going forward the next 10 years?
We've been working a lot within the automotive industry. The automotive industry is a really interesting one because it's an industry that's going through a huge amount of change. It's going from combustion engines to electrification. It's going from people driving to automation. And it's an industry, therefore, that doesn't have solutions in place already for all of that. And so it's looking for ways to create a secure way to connect all of those effectively edge devices, cars, to each other in a secure way. I often like to think about the automotive industry is the perfect example of a permissionless network. So if you imagine a road with hundreds of different cars on it, they don't trust each other. They're made by different manufacturers, but they all need to, if they're going to become autonomous, then they need to be able to trust each other, basically. So blockchain is the perfect way to have a secure connection between devices that don't trust each other, because you have that permissionless, trustless network and effect. So we've been working a lot with the automotive industry. About 2 years ago, we joined a mobility accelerator called Mobility X Labs with partners like Volvo, Polestar, and Geely Autos. And there we were investigating and deploying nodes on head units of vehicles. And once you have a full node running on head units of vehicles, then it's an amazing amount of functionality that you can deliver to those vehicles. And we've got three good examples. One is within battery passports. So actually having a node running on a battery. Moving forwards, 60% of the value of the car is going to be in the battery, because it will matter how the battery's been charged, whether it's been trickle charged or supercharged. That will have a big effect on the life of the battery. Mm-hmm. So when you buy a car now, you'll be looking at the battery's life and through its passport, and also event data recording on the vehicle as well. So regulation is coming in. So effectively, it means that every new car is going to have effectively a black box, because as you move towards automation, it's going to need to have insurance companies are going to need to know exactly what happened when, in the case of an accident or something like that. And having a full node on the vehicle means that you can actually timestamp the event as it happens, and so that then is an immutable record of what happened. And then finally, the area within automotive that we're working on is within EV charging. So if you imagine, there's already a sort of a big public infrastructure of EV charging, but it's not going to cope with the amount of cars that they want to bring online over the next 10 years. So what we're finding is the OEMs are trying to find ways to incentivize EV owners to actually purchase wall boxes and then actually rent them out to others in order to help add to private wall boxes to a public infrastructure network. And by having a node on your vehicle and then also on the wall charger itself, it allows for access control. So effectively, Minima can create a token for access control. So I can find your wall box on an app. I can book a space. I will be issued with an access control token. I can take that token in the car effectively to your wall box, transfer that token to you, and then your wall box will deliver a charge, and then I can leave again. So it's a bit like Airbnb. So it's the lock on the door of an Airbnb apartment, effectively. So there are multiple different ways that blockchain can really help aid the automotive industry in delivering that. Yeah.
But it's funny you use Airbnb as an example, because before DePIN was a concept, I guess you could say Airbnb was a very early sort of iteration of what I guess DePIN became, was because it's like spare capacity of either hotels or private accommodation. One of the big friction points of uptake of something like Airbnb was the trust aspect. And the good thing about blockchain and what you just mentioned is that all those things, all those use cases, they're completely trustless. So when it comes to uptake of DePIN applications, I think I ask a lot of projects that come on this podcast their favorite use case of DePIN outside of what they're immediately doing. We always end up with that question. And EV is one of the big things that comes up, because especially with charging, there's a short supply of charging infrastructure. That seems like that's the sort of bottleneck at the moment. Batteries is another one. And there is spare capacity with private wall boxes. And there isn't really a way of sort of them communicating with the car owners apart from a DePIN infrastructure Minima. So in my mind, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing worth, I guess, looking at the nuance of that is that in many ways, there are a lot of DePIN projects that are looking at ways to effectively sort of become an alternative solution to the centralized services that are out there already, whether it's compute or whether it is Wi-Fi or storage, stuff like that. Within the automotive and within this specific use case on EV charging, what we're effectively looking at is Web 2 companies that have a big customer base that are looking at ways to actually extend out the EV charging solution to their users. And they're using a sort of DePIN as a sort of the incentivization methodology to actually onboard more of their customers. So actually they're not trying to disrupt themselves. They're actually trying to add a decentralized infrastructure to their existing infrastructure. And it just gives much more scale to the solution. So yeah, we're finding it almost like a hybrid. So we call it enterprise DePIN in that respect of that particular solution. The DePIN sector is looking at ways to help scale digitization solutions for customers and make it more accessible, more resilient, and also cheaper as well.
Yeah.
Specifically on wall boxes, for example, the cost of charging up at a public charging station is actually pretty expensive. In some instances, it's more expensive than combustion fuel. Whereas if you actually go to private wall box owners, the infrastructure cost is much less. Obviously, Minima gives the access control, which would, in a public charging station, costs a lot of extra overhead.
Yeah.
So actually the opportunity for people to have better access to charging, but at a sort of more competitive rate is a win for users and those suppliers of that charging facility.
We spoke about the use cases of DePIN. I know we'll talk about other sort of things outside of DePIN, but when it comes to Minima, like powering that DePIN side and the blockchain provider, I guess like what makes Minima different in that aspect? Because DePIN is becoming a narrative, as there are other blockchains that do that. Some of them are built for DePIN, some of them aren't built for DePIN, but they're still DePIN projects built on top of them. Think of Solana as an example. So what sets Minima apart? I know the decentralization is one big piece, but is there any other benefits that you can think of in terms of like why this is so well built for DePIN?
Obviously, DePIN is about sort of connecting infrastructure networks and devices effectively. And the fact that Minima can run a full node on the edge in a device gives it a lot of functionality. It can do the transfer of tokens for incentive mechanisms, but also critically, it means that devices themselves have a huge amount of capability added. So you can have secure communications device to device. You can transfer value device to device, but you can also create tokens. So you can actually issue smart contracts from the device itself. And the fact that the device is issuing those tokens just creates a huge amount of value capture in that device and the data coming from that device. It doesn't have to talk to a centralized entity in order to add it to the blockchain. There are a lot of solutions out there, blockchain, L1 blockchains, where effectively are connecting a device to a blockchain. The way the Minima works is effectively each of the devices become part of the blockchain. So it's much more secure, much more cost effective. And so you have the ability to transfer tokens, but you also have the ability for data validation, data attestation on those devices as well. And in many ways, people talk about sort of data being the new oil and data being all important. So when you can have a device that can actually have data attestation at that level, then it becomes a very valuable proposition. And so effectively DePINs who are building on Minima benefit from the tokenization aspect, but also the data attestation element as well.
And what is the value in terms of real world application when it comes to smart devices creating tokens, the data attestation that you talked about? What's the value for the end user, or who does that benefit, and what are the problems that they experience right now that would solve?
It hasn't started yet in many ways. I think that as devices become more intelligent or more capable, then that is when data will become more important. I mean, there are a lot of really cool projects out there at the moment, specifically in automotive, for example, the likes of Demo and SawChain, looking at ways to help users monetize their data. And then, obviously there's a supply side looking for that. And then there's also the demand side about who's going to pay for that data. And I think that's still an ever evolving sort of landscape. I don't think there's anyone who's finally landed on the exact use case and the type of data that's going to be valuable. But I think that's going to come. So obviously once it can happen, then the results are going to come out of that. The difference is with Minima, we can offer to DePINs is that you don't have to have bespoke hardware that attaches to the car, the functionality of a blockchain will actually be inside the car itself. So it'll actually be embedded within the vehicle itself. And that's the next stage. So effectively, in the old days, when satellite navigation started off, you had to buy like a TomTom or a sat nav to actually sit on your dashboard. And that was a great step forward, but it was pretty sort of one way and sort of not very responsive. It didn't tell you about traffic jams or anything like that. It just told you where to go. Was now obviously when you buy a car, it has a sat nav built into it. It has traffic control and everything like that. It recognizes traffic situations.
Yeah.
And I think it's that step that we are moving from an add-on into something that's inbuilt into the computers that are cars now, basically.
Yeah.
And that is the form factor change that we now have with Minima, is that rather than it being something that is connected to a blockchain that is secured by external miners or stakers, now actually the vehicle themselves are actually securing the network itself and delivering the service from there.
Yeah.